So, I finally watched the K-pop Demon Hunters, and what are my thoughts on this film? Does it live up to the hype that fans talk about, and its merit for being an award-winning animation? Let's find out in this review. What's up guys, it's William. Today, I'll be reviewing a pretty popular movie that came out last year. Literally, the day that I'm uploading this will be the 1 year anniversary of Sony's K-pop Demon Hunters movie. Which in the context that it now made its way to be an award-winning animation, it pretty much was such an eye-catching aspect that elevated the intrigue for me to check out this film. But also because earlier I had watched GOAT, which was already part of the Sony's picture family and was a decent blast of a film through my personal watch experience. And now, to be open, it is a very weird way of how I discovered this film, because obviously I'm not someone who lives under the roof of the Sony Pictures world, but just constantly last summer I've been seeing this gif of Rumi smelling sushi just circulating around social media as I'm scrolling through, and being the sheltered man I am, just making an assumption that it's from a video game. But sure as hell, I was wrong on that front. And it's truly when Name the Movie starts to spruce more around my feed that I eventually discover the originator of that gift. So bam, that's where I would learn of the existence of the K-pop Demon Hunters. A very strange titling, I will say at first glance. First off, just from how it sounds, the demographic definitely does not suit for me. As middling my taste in music is, I'm not like a big nerd for K-pop music. Though if you could name one that I would often blast in my entire house, you could consider Apate. Okay, enough said of this life story, but in general, learning about this film, I had it shelved for a while until whenever I decided it was time to check it out. And with the film's 1 year anniversary coming up, which by the time this video is out, it actually will be, this was totally apt to finally give this film a review of my own. Now, my impression coming into this, I was just like, what is this gonna even be about? Like, are we just gonna be bombarded with musical facets of them all? Like, a lot of questions that are up in the air makes it more interesting just by how the title of this movie was suggesting. Like, looking into the description and the whole vibe of this film, it really is bombarded with like the Korean culture of mythology and its industry blended with its obvious K-pop culture that has been pretty much in a lot of high charts in our modern times. So it is a vastly interesting concept of integrating a lot of those into a near 100-minute movie. And damn, well, I'll say it, this is a pretty fire movie. Like, I am astonished how much of a turnaround it had for my opinions on it, which, I mean, to be fair, it could have been influenced by the whole positive reception it has been getting, which, I mean, I have a fair share with the statistics it's getting, though I don't personally place all my eggs in the basket that it's truly like huge peak of a film, but it is pretty gosh darn excellent, with so much work with its visual style, because Sony has that huge tenacity to not mutilate its animation quality. Plus, we bring along the whole electrifying energy that this film exudes, with so much of the vibe with like the whole story of the mall, the soundtrack, and just the whole in-roll of the mall, the whole concept of what this film entails. Which, to elaborate what this film's description was, it was basically about these trio K-pop singers who pursue on their singing career, making their performance while also fending off demons who impose a huge danger to their fans. And it's just a unique premise that fits two different puzzle pieces together pretty elegantly. And I think on the bright side, the theme and moral of this film is one of the lexicon. So anyways, for this video, like every other review I make, I would briefly run through the movie and share my thoughts and opinions along the way, and then give my final thoughts on it at the end. So then, enough said, grab all the snacks you need and come on in for this review. So briefly breaking down the story of this movie, it revolves around three singers who are known as the Huntrix, who are enlisted on a mission to fend off the demons mixed in with their singing careers. And this is a very well established plot that only gets a bit more garnished as we move along, when we learn of that one of Huntrix members, Rumi, is actually a part demon as well, and she's obscured this secret from her friends, which is quite literally the key suspense maker throughout this movie. And I feel like it really adds this very shifty tone with the storyline, knowing that there is more individuality with one of the characters, especially given the risk that Rumi's secret could impose if her friends would make a discovery, which, I mean, in most cases it was gonna be eventually revealed to them, as why else introduce this part in the process. So then we have the demons here, who act as the antagonists of the film, and they impose a very dangerous force with the ability to eliminate innocent lives through their perks of absorbing their souls. And their prowess pretty much became persistent until the Huntrix came into the picture, which led to them changing their objectives to now having to take the tree down themselves, as this plays into the mold of the Huntrix being a near impenetrable barrier between the demons and the humans. And talking about the Huntrix, having his double life as being a singers and demon slayers was a very interesting trope to push forward the narrative. And to really get into the meat and bones, the King of Demons enlists a group of demons to play up a role of a boy band, in which in one of them, the member's name is Jinyu, who develops a very interesting role throughout this film. And theoretically, it feels like Jinyu was in that character mold of someone who had redemptive qualities and began tapping back into the moral standings. But anyways, this boy band will be known as the Saja Boys, who create themselves as a rival against the Hundreds, both from a career and dynamic standpoint. But the Hundreds do sniff out easily that the Saja Boys are secretly demons. However, in one of their ensuing fights, Jinyu would make the discovery of Rumi being a half-demon herself, which becomes the thread that connects the two together. But before I even further expand on this blooming relationship, I might as well talk about the spiraling effects that the demon inheritance has been having on Rumi. With this being such a stigma that she has to keep obscured from her friends, this does thematically speaks to a lot of insecurity with her positioning. On top of the fact that there are some after effects that's going on with her singing voice slowly dwindling, which it is getting noticed by her fellow members, that leads to a lot of suspicions about her from which they aren't wrong about that. Clearly Rumi didn't really play her cards correctly in this spot. But anywho, revisiting back to what I've already elucidated between the relationship of Jinyu and Rumi, where they come to eye to eye with an exchange of compromises they can make for the benefits of each other, with this ultimately being a huge dilemma on Jinyu's end, with Rumi willing to welcome him back into the humanity, which as juicy of an offering that is, he also is still technically under the contract of what the Demon King wants him to do with fulfilling his task as he plays up the role of the Saja Boy. And it seemed like just at face value, Jinyu was willing to really deviate himself from under the Demon King's thumb, even opening up to Rumi about his personal past and what brought him into the demon community, which again is a nice little endearing moment between the two to embrace each other's identities. Like overall, Jinyu's backstory does making a tad more compelling, but I guess who would have guessed it wouldn't last that long, as we later find out his level of fantasy was far from it. And to really play into that doubt, we have the Demon King summoning him back to his presence, learning about Jinyu's dilemma, which obviously does not suit for his standards, leading to him really much peer pressuring Jinyu to stay on track with their deal, which unfortunately he does end up doing that, which is just a shame alone. But I mean, come on, in the spot that Jinyu was in, he was really having his hands tied behind his back. But what I can condemn him for is, despite that at all, the backstory he shared with Rumi was completely disingenuous, and it was revealed to be a lot more merciless on his end, and I think that really drops the ball a lot on his character when learning about this, where it just feels like all of interesting growth that we were potentially gaining with this character kind of just goes out the window. And with just how minimal of time we really get with his arc, it just sort of makes me feel less attached with his character than how the film is trying to make the audience care for him, when really his actions just makes him so disingenuous. And you know what? This sort of does remind me of another particular character from a film that came afterwards, that being Popper from Zootopia, who knowingly was also associated with a dangerous faction, but seemingly was shown to be willing to break away on their zone to really help out Judy's case, which is a similar thing with how Jinyu was seeming to renege his deal for the sake of benefiting Rumi. And what ends up making the parallels is that both end up proving that all along they were just being deceitful for their own personal gains. But in comparison, I think Popper was a lot more threatening of the two, and the writing of his intentions was fleshed out elegantly, while Jinyu, I just feel like kind of felt a tad shallow. Like unlike Popper, he does somehow still try to sustain his redemptive quality, which I could say could have been written a bit better so there can be more proper emphasis and balance between both the right and wrong of his actions. Anywho, I kind of went overblown on this, so going back to the Hundreds of them all, while having this rivalry with the Saja Boys, they're practicing new songs for an important performance on the night that acts as the final hurrah that would seal the fate of the demons. However, the demons and the Saja Boys recognize the crumbling position that they're in, and in turn leads to their new plan that ultimately was a success for the most part, where they were able to use their perks to make imposters of themselves and also trick Mira and Zoe that lures them away, leading to the imposters exposing Rumi's secret to everyone and to the horror of Mira and Zoe, putting a rift in their trust with each other. And it's like the crap really hit the fan on Rumi's part, but it is also the bigger sting when she finds Jinyu and learns that he lied to her about his backstory that truly leaves her in an isolated position. And with the Hundreds basically broken up at this point, the demons seemingly now had the upper hand to finally harvest the rest of the townspeople's souls. Well, you have Rumi returning back to her homeland to basically lay down her sword, which I mean, from her perspective, it feels like she was just feeling all of defeat. I mean, now her friends don't even trust her anymore after learning of her demon patterns, and they even were brandishing their swords at her, which suggests that they don't even want anything to do with her. Learning of Jinyu's lie was another assault to add to the wound, and now the whole town is seemingly have their fates sealed. So I get that Rumi is just resigned to defeat in this spot, but I do think trying to get the help from Selene, the person who tasked the Huntrix to fend off the demons, didn't seem the most optimal, especially with how Selene responded, which was not in favor of how she wanted this to sound. And otherwise, Selene just came off extremely self-absorbed here in this spot, feeling like she did not recognize the moral regarding Rumi's identity and trying to encourage her to make suboptimal decisions that impose more harm for her down the road if things go awry, which the current situation is an example to make out of that. Like, we don't even get much Selene throughout this movie, so I can't have too much to elaborate on her character, but just from these short scenes alone with her, she just felt like she misunderstood a lot of the ethics surrounding Rumi's own character. But anyways, her chastism as Selene also helps build up her resilience to single-handedly perform on stage, which also helps tap Mira and Zoe back to their senses, where they join along Rumi for the performance and slay the rest of the demons. And for a bit of some sad closure to Jinyu, he would ultimately sacrifice himself when the Demon King tries to strike at Rumi. And I could just sit here being like, oh good, he finally redeemed himself, okay. But likewise, I wish it would have been written a bit better so his eventual sacrifice could have been a bit more bigger on its impact rather than just being so abrupt and fleshed out like that. But either way, the Surger Boys and all the demons have finally been defeated, and basically as foreseeable, Rumi was able to reconcile with her Huntrix members and they go on and continued their path as a band. That's one hell of a movie right there. It's not perfect by any means. The plot, while fairly compelling, does have major flaws, but it is still a very enjoyable movie. The humor, at least we do have some landings for them. Like, they feel vibrant overall. Our characters have interesting arcs. I mean, particularly Rumi, who I think pretty much steals the show for the most part here. Oh hey, and speaking of, how can I miss out talking about the Legend of Maul, this derpy tiger here. Okay, like seriously, I have seen screenshots of this guy circulating on the internet. However, myself, as hidden under a rock as always, did not know that this fuzzball originated from this movie. Which, I mean, the feature on him is just cool. It's just your average cute character that some fans are gonna have their eyes on Drew despite the minimal screen time they get. This movie pushes well with some of the more darker tones for the story, and I personally consider it working well because it creates this flow that makes the situation for our characters a lot more urgent than following a mellow gust of wind that ultimately deprives most of the tense suspensions in movies. And the sound in this film is beautiful. Like, I'll admit the music is somewhat catchy, but in most fashion they're just not my vibe as something I would re-listen constantly for, but it still had a very sublime energy surrounding them. And collectively, all of this is what succeeds in fleshing out for a sequel film that'll come out in a few years. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to add that review down the road, which regardless where this channel goes. But yeah, this film really made its own bed with a nice cushiony landing spot with how much it's triumphed himself, even winning the awards, which I believe are pretty warranted. Like, I'm glad we're now in an era, especially at this time, where these established animations are back to making some big hits, and this film just follows those tropes but in a very sublime fashion. I feel like what also makes it great was the well-executed animation, which Sony Pictures in general always has a unique style of pictures, so it does flesh out this very eye-catching aesthetic to follow along throughout the movie. And would I mean that this movie would get me into K-pop? Unfortunately, not really. I would still probably listen to some songs occasionally, but not really like be this enthusiast for them. Likewise, they're just not my biggest vibe with music, but it doesn't mean that I'm entirely stirred away from its genre. But just by everything, the movie does practically nail it as a film, and Sony Pictures feels like they're on its own track to maneuver around any ghastly drums in its way instead of going straight at it and bombing what could have been a potential masterpiece. And they really showed their prowess with like the Spider-Verse and recently the GOAT movie this year. Plus a pretty well-deserved award that this film respectively gotten, so kudos to them. It is a film worth watching, though not really like to the upper echelon in my personal book. Still a pretty successful film bombarded with so much flawless elements surrounding it. Gotta give the props here, you know. All of these factors are what makes the success of this film very warranted. But from there, that really wraps up the video for you. Feel free to comment and share how you vibed with this movie. Are you now going to start immersing into the K-pop world because of it? This piece right here is on that spectacle. But likewise, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss out on more of these coverages down the road. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'm going to sign off here. See you all in the next video.